Here I am, I'm running late, but I will still try to make sure we get out on time. We'll work at that. I don't know that we'll finish the chapter, but we'll hopefully make some good progress here. So we left off, I think, we did verses 6 and 7. Let's just look at those verses again very briefly. So
14.
Chapter 14, verses 6 and 7. Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. And he said with a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water." So remember, there's going to be three angels here making these proclamations. And then we're going to see the harvest of the earth at the end of the chapter. That's two more angels. So this is the first of the three in the middle. And the reason I thought it's worth reviewing, Pastor Morris, God bless him. He's such a rich person to get to chat with. And so every once in a while he'll bring stuff up, and he popped his head in on Wednesday. And he had looked at I think I won't say it since this gets taped, which one it is, doesn't matter, but an older Lutheran commentary, which I have, where it seeking to identify who this angel is that's flying with an eternal gospel, said it's Dr. Martin Luther, because he brought the gospel back. Now, is that right or is it wrong? Well, yes. In other words, remember that when we're reading these things, we shouldn't be looking for one-to-one points of correspondence. It's not as though when it talks about the beast, it's talking about this particular guy, a certain emperor or a certain pope or a certain president, right? And when it's talking about this angel, it's not talking about a certain guy. It's not Martin Luther or anybody else. Remember, it's a vision to try to explain these larger theological truths. And so the point is that the eternal gospel, the message of the good news of Christ, has been brought to the world. Did Martin Luther, does he stand in the tradition firmly of the fulfillment of that action of God in the world? Yes. So in that sense, he does fulfill it. But you're not looking for these one-to-one fulfillments. I think that's not the way we want to go with it. And then the big question that gets so much debate on this first angel is the connection between the idea of an eternal gospel and the message that the angel shouts with a loud voice. Fear God and give him glory, because his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water. What does the gospel have to do with that message? Is that message part of the gospel? The gospel, at least narrowly construed, the answer is no. Remember, I asked last week, and you all got it right. What is the gospel, strictly speaking?
Good news of Jesus Christ.
The good news of Jesus Christ. The good news that Jesus Christ, for the sake of his death on the cross and his resurrection, God forgives us our sins and declares us justified or righteous. What does that have to do with God bringing judgment? Bringing judgment's not the gospel. I think of all the debate that circles around that issue, this is where I come down on it. That the gospel has this element to it. That God saves you for the sake of Jesus Christ from judgment. That's how it fits in. You don't go to the great judgment of God's wrath because of the gospel. So the reason that this angel is connected to the message is because he's got the gospel, and then he's letting everybody know, this thing from which you have been saved, it's coming. Here it is. That's what the three angels are doing, is declaring the arrival of judgment. So just so you know, this thing that God saved you from in Jesus Christ, the judgment is arriving. Does that make sense? All right, so let's go to the second angel, verse 8. Another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality." Now, we're introduced here to Babylon, Babylon the Great. We're going to hear a lot more about Babylon the Great as we continue to go through the book of Revelation. Let's just very quickly just do some finger exercises here, paging through these scriptures, all right? You can just do it real fast with me. Chapter 14, verse 8. All right, are you there? Another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality." Now go to chapter 16, verse 9. 16:9. That can't be right. That is not correct, but I don't know which one I'm missing here. All right, let's skip that for now because I don't know what I meant to write. Go to 17:5. 17:5. "And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations." Let's go to 18:2. 18:2. "And he called out with a mighty voice, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." Let's go to 18:10. 18:10. "They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city, Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come." Let's go to 18:21. 18:21. "Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, So will Babylon the great city be thrown down with violence and will be found no more." So you're going to see this idea of Babylon the Great being introduced more here. And that language comes from the Old Testament. So let's very quickly go to a couple Old Testament passages. Isaiah 21, verse 9. Isaiah 21:9. You see it there, Isaiah 21:9. "And behold, here come riders, horsemen, and pairs. And he answered, Fallen, fallen is Babylon, and all the carved images of her gods he has shattered to the ground." Let's go to Jeremiah 51. Jeremiah 51. Jeremiah 51, we could actually read an extended section if we wanted to, but I'll try to just narrow it down. Let's go to verse 8. "Suddenly Babylon has fallen and been broken, wail for her." Let's go to verse 49, same chapter, verse 49. "Babylon must fall for the slain of Israel, just as for Babylon have fallen the slain of all the earth." So this idea, this concept of Babylon being fallen comes out of the Old Testament language there. So it helps us to think about for a moment what is Babylon. What do you know about the historic Babylon, especially in terms of the Old Testament or the Bible? What was Babylon's connection to the people of Israel? Does anybody know that wants to give us a little summary there?
They wanted to go.
Yes.
What was left there?
Right. So there's a success. I wonder if we've got it on a map somewhere. Probably. Maybe, I don't know. I didn't think of this. I put it up before. I should have. Yeah, here we go. All right, so you recognize what you're looking at there?
No.
Here's Egypt, the Mediterranean Sea, Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Sinai. Over here would be modern day Iraq and Iran. And what you're seeing here is the succession of great empires, right? So the first great empire to arise that ended up conquering huge swaths of area was the Assyrian Empire. So the Assyrian Empire is represented by this blue and green. And see how, and here's Assyria. Assyria would have been up here. And see how they conquered all this area? And it was under Assyria that the northern tribes of Israel were destroyed. And then about 150 years later, Assyrian Empire was destroyed by the new emerging empire, which was Babylon, the Babylonian Empire. So the Babylonian Empire is represented by the yellow and the green. See, it's got overlap with Assyria. So the Babylonian Empire was even bigger. And it was Babylon that destroyed Judah and the southern kingdom. And then Babylon, remember what they did? They took the nobles in Judah. And if you were smart, if you were a craftsman, if you were capable of doing things where you might be a threat to have a rebellion or a revolt, what did they do? They took you away and brought you to Babylon. So all the people in Judah were taken away to Babylon, and that's called the Exile. So it's a huge event. So much of the Old Testament revolves around this historic event of being taken away into Babylon. Like the book of Daniel, remember Daniel was working for the Babylonian emperors. It's really important. And then just for the sake of continuity, Babylon's empire was destroyed by whom? Does anyone remember?
Persian.
Yeah, the Persian Empire. So here's like a small map that shows because the Persian Empire really stretched out. They covered a lot of territory. And the Medes connected to the Persians, and then who ended up conquering the immediate Persians? Alexander the Great and the Greeks. And then who ended up conquering Alexander the Great's empire? Rome, yeah. So you see one giant empire after another. But the one that destroyed Judah, that took all of Judah's young men and took them away into exile and beat them down and destroyed their temple and tried to destroy their faith and ruin them, that was Babylon. So ever since then, Babylon becomes a way of describing the great oppression against God and against his people. Those who stand against God is Babylon. So who in John's day would have been Babylon? Rome, right. And so we've already seen that, the city on the 7 hills. So is he talking about the Babylonian Empire or the Roman Empire? Or again, it's not one-to-one correspondence. Who is it? It's all of them. It's all the system out there of everybody that is opposed to the true worship of God and to God's
Political system?
people. Every political system. Could it be in American systems?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. Was it Nazi Germany?
Yeah.
Sure. Is it communist China? Sure. Everywhere and anywhere where there are these giant conglomerate magnates of power, whether it's civil authority power or military power or social, cultural power, but anyone and everyone that stands against God and his people, that's Babylon. That's Babylon. And so what does it say here? The second angel, again, verse 8 of our text. What's going to happen to Babylon? She's going to be fallen. I assure you, people of God, Babylon's going to fall. What did Babylon do? She made all the nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. What we've already talked about this before, because it was earlier in the chapter where the people of God were described as virgins. We said that's not real, it's not actual virgins, it's speaking about being faithful to their God, not falling into idolatry. So when it talks here about Babylon, how she makes nations get caught up in the passion of sexual immorality, what's that describing? That's
infidelity between one and God, the husband.
Yes, right. So it's the opposite of the virgins, right? In other words, all the nations that did partake in idolatry, all the nations that did forsake their true love, God, and turn to all the false gods that are out there. Babylon is the one that makes people imbibe of all of that. She does it by making them drink the wine. In other words, their senses are dull, their inhibitions and thresholds are minimized, and they cross the line and they engage in this evil in the sight of God. And who made them do it? Babylon. But what's going to happen to Babylon? Her judgment comes. Look at the third angel, verse 9, starting at verse 9. And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. And he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest, day or night. These worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. So, 3 angels. The first one lets them know that judgment has come. The second one lets us know that Babylon, the great enemy, is going to be fallen, it's going to be destroyed. And the third one lets us know that anybody who's had the mark of the beast, anybody who worshipped the dragon or worshipped the beast and didn't have God's mark sealing them, they are the ones that are going to be caught up in this great judgment. And then the description of the judgment there is terrible, right? It's terrible.
In other words, they're going to hell.
That's the way we would say it today. That's the way we would say it. I want to talk about that, but let's just first focus for a moment on this idea of the cup. So whoever has the mark of the beast, and you remember I said, everybody has a mark. You are either marked with the seal of God, you belong to the Lamb, or you have the seal or the mark of the beast. There's no in between. There's no people trying to decide yet. Well, which do I want to get? I have to research this a little bit more. No, everybody has one mark or the other. It's just this great divide. And everyone who gets this mark is going to drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength in the cup of his anger. So this idea of a cup, that comes from the Old Testament too. Let's look up a few passages. Let's just look up one for the sake of time. Jeremiah 25. Jeremiah 25. This too is an extended passage. We could actually read most of the chapter here if we wanted to. But if you just go to Jeremiah 25, and if you're using one of the church's Bibles like this, the ESV, you see right in front of verse 15, the little bold, what's the word I'm looking for? What is that called? Yeah, subtitle, thank you. So that's not God's word, right? That's something the translators put in there to let us know what the rest of it's about. But what is this about from verse 15 on? The cup of the Lord's wrath. Verse 15, thus the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me, take from my hand this cup of the wine of wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. They shall drink and stagger and be crazed because of the sword that I am sending among them. So, as you read it, what is the imagery of this cup of the Lord's wrath? Well, think of like a cup of alcohol, and it's God's, instead of being filled with wine, it's being filled with the wrath of God. So that just like somebody who drinks a big cup of wine and then they start doing this, when you drink the Lord's wrath, it makes you stagger. It makes you lose your sensibilities. You lose your judgment. You lose your discernment. It brings upon you something that's going to be your ruin and destroy you. And so a way of describing those that are going to receive judgment from God is that they're made to drink this cup. So that's imagery that's in multiple places in the Old Testament. So here in Revelation 14, we're told that the people who have the beast's mark are going to receive it. And they're going to be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. This idea of being tormented. A lot of times it's very easy to think about the Bible in terms of the evolution of religion. That religion started out, even God's religion, the true religion, started out being very bloody and gory, and the way you would expect barbarous people to have acted 3,000 years ago, right? How did they do sacrifices? They killed animals. But now, with the New Testament, why humanity has grown, and we've come out of this sense of goriness and barbarism, and we're more civilized now. So whereas they killed animals, what do? We have the symbolic animal. I didn't hear, what is it?
We kill babies.
Yeah, you're right, our barbarism is not. And that puts the lie to the falsehood that humanity has grown, doesn't it? Good point. But this idea that we've grown now, for us, religion is more symbolic. The symbolism of the Lamb of God who died, and the idea that we're more ethical. And whereas in the Old Testament, the law was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But in the New Testament, the law is love your neighbor as yourself. You see how pretty this sounds and how we've grown? That is not an accurate impression of the Bible. So in the Old Testament, if you broke the laws, for example, the woman caught in adultery, they were following the Old Testament law there in John 9, I think it is. What was the punishment for the woman caught in adultery? What were they supposed to do? They were supposed to stone her, right? What was the punishment for being caught up in witchcraft in the Old Testament? Well, yeah, you'd be executed. In other words, the punishments in the Old Testament were so harsh, so physical, so cruel. And now in the New Testament, we've gone beyond that, right? No. What the New Testament shows us is that those things, as barbarous as they may seem, as horrendous as they appear, are actually prefiguring the seriousness of breaking the law, the seriousness of God's wrath, which is so incredible that the punishment for it is not losing your life. The punishment for it is to be tormented forever and ever. How can a loving God torment people forever and ever, and we would call it hell? How can he send somebody to hell? That really sticks in the craw for us, doesn't it? We don't like that. But the answer is, we don't fully understand or fully appreciate how serious violations of God's law and his holiness actually are. we think it's a small deal. If somebody breaks God's law, God should just kind of let them off the hook. We don't realize that breaking God's law is, God is an infinite God, and a sin against an infinite God is an infinite sin. There is no limitation to it. There is no narrowing it down or defining it down. It's an infinite sin. Pastor?
Hold on, I'm not changing the subject. But I was just thinking about the cup of God's wrath.
Yeah.
And Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Father, if it is your will,
Take this cup from me. I hope everybody heard that.
Oh, the cup of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, asking God to remove the cup from him.
Yeah.
I have this really old painting I found up in an attic in an antique store of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. And here's coming this angel with the cup of God's wrath for him to drink. And you know, what a picture that paints.
Yeah, I hope you all heard that, because that's right on. That's exactly what's going on there. Is Jesus going to have to take the cup of God's wrath that you and I were supposed to drink? So this idea of torment, what it does in the New Testament, it doesn't lower the severity of breaking God's law. It ratchets it up. No, if you break God's law, if you are an idolater and you worship the beast, the penalty is not that you're executed. The penalty is you go to hell. That's how big a deal it is. That's how serious it is. This idea of fire and sulfur, that kind of language, what does that remind you of from the Old Testament? Fire and sulfur. Sodom and Gomorrah, right. And then look at verse 11. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. You remember when Abraham looked at Sodom and Gomorrah, remember what it says he saw? He knew that Sodom and Gomorrah had been destroyed because he saw the smoke rising up like a giant, from a giant furnace into the sky. So that's the kind of image here. The smoke of the torment of those who go to hell will go up forever and ever. Is hell something that you just kind of can get over with after a million years, then you're kind of exterminated or annihilated and that's done? No, it's eternal. And they have no rest. This idea of rest in eternity, I think, is so important. Because when someone dies, for us, what do we tell? What do we say, or what do we write in it? Rest in peace. In other words, they have come into their Sabbath. That's the imagery that's used elsewhere in the New Testament. The Sabbath, the day of rest. They've come into their final rest. The saints have rested from their labors. The frenetic push, the drive that's always on your back is ended. You can enjoy now forever and ever. But those who suffer this eternal torment, they never have rest. They always have this anxiety, this push, this drive, this self-torture. Why did I do this? Why didn't I do that? It's his fault. It's his fault. Blame, constant blame. So the imagery here of this third angel that he's given us of what judgment is frightening and ferocious. It's a terrible thing. That's why we should never casually talk about hell. I have done it. I have to admit, I guess I'm confessing. Pastor, maybe you could absolve me after class. I always like the Far Side, those Gary Larson cartoons, and some of them are so funny, right? Like the devil that's showing this old professor man with he's got like little wire glasses and he's got a conducting baton, and he was clearly a orchestra conductor, and when he was in life, now he's in hell. And he's being escorted into this room, and there's guys there with blowing the jugs and playing the washboard. The devil's going, "This is your room, maestro." It is kind of funny, isn't it? But in all seriousness, hell is not a joke. It's something
Pastor,
so
correction,
terrible.
they were all accordions.
They were accordions? Are you sure?
That's a different one.
Oh.
Welcome to heaven, here's your harp, and then the others say, welcome to hell, here's your accordion.
Oh, we got our Gary Larson cartoons mixed up. Christians and pastors don't talk about hell because we like the idea of us righteous people are going to be saved, but you're going to get it. That doesn't delight us. That doesn't make us happy. But it's a reality. It's the reality. And so what these angels are doing, you see here, the first one let us know judgment is certain. The second one lets us know Babylon is going to get it. It's not going to stand. And the third one lets us know the judgment that they suffer is going to be terrible, tormenting, and eternal. That's the message here. So it should strike those who get the mark of the beast, to let them know you don't want the mark of the beast. You want to be sealed with the seal of the Lamb. All of that, drives verse 12. Verse 12. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. In other words, what is the takeaway from this message that the three angels give us about this judgment that's coming? It's a takeaway to remind you to endure. Endure. Don't let your faith be lost. Don't drift away from the Lord. Don't give up on your commitment to Jesus Christ and your confidence in what Christ did for you. No matter how bad things get, don't let go of that. Endure. Because judgment is coming, and those who are judged face something fearsome and terrible. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do next week then. We'll do the harvest of the earth. We'll finish the chapter next week. All right, thanks everybody. God bless.